class, welcome back to World History 2. I hope everyone is doing well today. In our last lecture, we began the study of the American Revolution, and in today's video, we're going to be finishing the American Revolution, and then we'll also look at some of the founding documents of the United States. Stay tuned for the PowerPoint. Okay, class, we're going to have our lecture on part 3 of revolutions. This is the second half of the Revolutionary War. So we're just going to continue on with the American Revolution from the last lecture, PowerPoint slide in the last video. But today we're going to finish up the timeline, and this is basically going to be a focus on the victory of the United States of America and then the setting up of the government. So to just finish up the Revolutionary War portion of this lecture, the single most political success for the colonists was the critical treaty of alliance with France. As you remember, the alliance with France caused the French to help supply the United States with military equipment, ships, troops, sailors, finances. So they had a powerful ally in Europe, and it was being played out on the battlefield in the United States. 1778 to 1780, there was basically developed into a stalemate in the north, in the northern states, but there was more activity in the south. One of the occurrences that occurred in the north was the situation with U.S. General Benedict Arnold in 1780, where he defects from the U.S. side, and he defects and goes over to the British side. And the story behind this is that Arnold was upset of his treatment by the U.S. military. He had been a successful general, won some battles, battlefield bravery, was wounded in the leg, but he felt that he was being treated poorly by the military because they did not give him pay, and also lack of more battlefield command opportunities. He was trying to get promoted, and one way for promotion to come faster is if you have experience in battle, and definitely if you're successful in battle, which he was. And so he was upset about all of this, and one situation that really made him upset was he was made garrison commander of West Point, which is north of New York City. Well, garrison commander is not necessarily a field command where you're in charge of battalions or brigades of troops and you're out there in the field, battling the British. A garrison commander is basically the guy that's in charge of a fort. And so West Point was a fort on the Hudson River, and it was a very strategic fort, but it wasn't a field command that Arnold wanted. So what he does, he plots with British Major John Andre to hand over West Point to the British in exchange for 20,000 pounds and a British field command. So he's going to commit treason, give the British the fort, he'll get the money, and he'll switch over to the British side and become a British general with a field command so that he can go and now battle against the colonists. But this plot was exposed by a spy ring that was operating on Long Island, and Andre was captured on his way to West Point. Arnold was not captured. He escaped down the Hudson River to New York City, where a British ship took him on board in New York City harbor. Andre was hung by the Americans. He was 30 years old. He was hung for this escapade with trying to take West Point after it was going to be handed over by Benedict Arnold. On the flip side, Arnold, he is given a field command by the British, but after the British lose the war, Arnold can't stay in the United States because he's a traitor. And so he went to England, and he lived his remaining days in England. And if someone's a traitor to the United States, sometimes, it's an older phrase now, but sometimes they're called a Benedict Arnold because of how important an event this was that the colonists captured Andre, but also kind of exposed this plot of treason and being a traitor at the high level of the military, because Arnold was a general. So there's a picture of Benedict Arnold on the left. Again, he lived out his days in England. And then on the right is the hanging of John Andre. He was hung near Tarrytown, New York, which I've been to Tarrytown. There's a little plaque that says this was the location where he was hung. All right, so continuing on with the timeline, 1781, there's war in the South, and there's a couple of battles there. The Battle of Cowpens, which was a U.S. victory. A Siege of Charleston, which was a British victory. The Battle of the Chesapeake was a naval battle between the French and the British. The warships came alongside each other and shot each other up pretty good with their cannon, and that was a French victory. And then finally, the Battle of Yorktown is where the British basically lost the war. British General Cornwallis, he surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown, and even though the war would continue on for just a little bit longer, the Battle of Yorktown is recognized as the battle that basically the British lost and the United States won that battle to where it established the United States, ending the Revolutionary War. So here's a painting of Cornwallis surrendering. And so you have George Washington is actually back here in the back. And this is the British here with their white flag. They've surrendered. So that's just a painting of the surrender at Yorktown. In 1783, a treaty was signed in Paris. It was called the Treaty of Paris, and that ends the Revolutionary War. The signers include Ben Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams. So these aren't just a couple of guys over there signing away in Paris. These are founding fathers who went to Paris to sign this treaty where it established the United States. Of the articles, there were articles within this treaty, like bullet points within this treaty, and they varied in topic, everything from fishing rights to borders of some lands near the Mississippi River. So there's a variety of articles, but only one article is still in force to this day, and that is the establishment of the United States. And a quote from the treaty: "The United States is to be free, sovereign, and independent states." So a big one, obviously being free from the tyranny of the king, but sovereign is a big one. Sovereignty, that means that it has come together, a United States as a sovereign nation. And they're independent states. So even though it's a United States, each state has independent authority within the United States. There's like a state government set up. So that's a very important treaty. The Treaty of Paris ended the Revolutionary War. Okay, so in regards to the establishment of the United States, so they win the war, and now we have to set up a government. And so the first attempt is in 1781, actually before the Treaty of Paris, before the war actually ends. There's the Articles of Confederation, and this is known as America's first constitution, and it's under a confederation of sovereign states. That's what they said. So this Articles of Confederation is adopted March 2nd, 1781, and it's the document that establishes a national government. It contained a preamble, which is kind of like an introduction. A preamble, it contained 13 articles, and then it had a conclusion. Article 1 of the Articles of Confederation is pretty important because it officially named the United States. It gave the country its name, known as the United States of America. So Article 1 of the Articles of Confederation gives the United States its name. The main idea of the Articles of Confederation was strong states and a weak federal government. So the idea was that instead of having one federal government in charge of all these states and is very strong and powerful and can boss these states around, it would more be strong states with states' rights and states, governing themselves, but together under a weaker federal government structure. The Articles of Confederation proved ineffective because the federal government was actually too weak. And they were the ones that were having to deal with to pay for the cost of the war. So you can't have a federal government that is too weak because the business has to be done. And in this case, the business was, how are we going to pay for this war? Well, if you're a weak federal government, you're not going to have any power to be able to make decisions on paying for a war. The Articles of Confederation had to be redone. And it was redone into the Constitution of the United States. Okay, so that's our next important document, the Constitution, 1787. Constitutional Convention is held. It's presided over by George Washington. It's assembled in Philadelphia, and it establishes America's government and laws that guarantee rights to citizens. So that's our Constitution, very well-known document. So there's three main functions of the Constitution. The first one here on this slide and the other one's coming up. The three main functions of the Constitution. Number one, it created a national government consisting of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches with a system of checks and balances among the three branches. So legislative is the Congress. That's the House of Representatives and the Senate. That's the legislative branch. The executive branch is the President of the United States. And the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. So those are the three branches of our government, and there's a checks and balances in all of this. So one doesn't become too powerful. Continuing on, number two, the division of power between federal and state governments. So the Constitution lays out the division of powers between these two entities, the federal government and the state government. And then number three is the Bill of Rights, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. The Bill of Rights. And September 17th, 1787, the U.S. Constitution is signed. And then it would have a ratification and all of that to have the endorsement of all the states. So September 17th, 1787, that's the important date of the U.S. Constitution being signed. Okay, just like I said in the previous slide that we're going to talk about the Bill of Rights, this is an important part because these are the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution. So you see on the first bullet point, the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution are called the Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments of the Constitution, Bill of Rights. So along with the Declaration of Independence, that's an important document, and the U.S. Constitution, that's an important document, the first 10 amendments, which is called the Bill of Rights, is also one of the most treasured founding documents of our country because we use it all the time. If you like to have freedom of religion, it's because of the Bill of Rights. That's the First Amendment. The Bill of Rights is known as the cornerstone of American freedoms, and we have a summary of them coming up next. You do need to know these, okay? You do need to know the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Amendment means a change has taken place or something was added to it, is amended in some way. So the First Amendment to the Constitution is, these are just summaries, but is freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. So if you like to have freedom of religion where you can worship without state interference and you can worship God how you want, how your church does, you can look back to the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. The First Amendment actually says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And the First Amendment is basically the people have the power to do these things freely from the federal government or the government itself interfering in any of this. So really, freedom of religion, let's use that as an example, is to basically say the government cannot make a state religion and force you to worship in a state religion. It's freedom of religion. It's been twisted today where someone says you can't pray in school because of separation of church and state. Well, separation of church and state, the whole premise for that is that the state cannot interfere with how you want to pray or whatever. It's been kind of twisted to make the freedom of religion the bad guy in the situation. Second Amendment, that's another big one that's being thrown around now in the news and all that with gun rights is the right to bear arms. So the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The Third Amendment, quartering of soldiers, which means these are the laws on soldiers staying in your home. Fourth Amendment is rules and laws in regards to arrest and searches. Fifth Amendment, the rights of a person accused of crimes, and you may have heard someone say this on the news or in like a government hearing or in trial, and where they say, I plead the Fifth. Because the Fifth Amendment says that you cannot be forced to answer a question that will incriminate yourself. And so if someone's asked a question on the stand that will incriminate them, they'll say, I plead the Fifth, which is basically a neutral answer of I don't have to answer that question. The Sixth Amendment, rights of person on trial for crimes. So we have the accused of crimes, and then we have the actual people on trial for crimes. Seventh is the jury trial for civil cases. So you have a right to a jury. Eighth Amendment is limitation for punishment and bail. So those are making sure that there's fair punishments. So it's not, if someone's caught stealing, they don't get their hand cut off. There's limitations put on things for punishment. Ninth Amendment is rights kept by the people. 10th Amendment is power kept by the states. And those are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. Notice there on the bottom, there have been 27 amendments to the Constitution, the first 10 being the Bill of Rights. So here's just a chart really quick. First 10 is the Bill of Rights. 11 is immunity of states from certain lawsuits. 12 is changes in electoral college procedure. 13, abolition of slavery. And you see the dates there on the right-hand side. That was 1865. The 14th Amendment, citizens, due process, and equal protections. 15th is no denial of vote because of race, color, or previous enslavement. 16th is the power of Congress to tax income. Now passed in 1913. 17th is a popular election of U.S. senators. 18 is the prohibition of alcohol. That's where alcohol became illegal in the United States. 19th Amendment is women's suffrage, which means women had the right to vote. The 20th Amendment, change of dates for start of the presidential and congressional terms. 21st Amendment, notice that, repeal of prohibition. So it got rid of the 18th Amendment in 1933, so alcohol was again legal. 22nd Amendment is the limit on presidential terms. Notice that's 1951, so after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, he served 3 terms as president because of World War II. Well, the 22nd Amendment limited the presidential terms. The 23rd Amendment is a District of Columbia vote in presidential elections because it's not a state, it's a district. Basically, it's a big city, that's all it is. 24th Amendment is a ban of tax payment on voter qualification. 25th Amendment, presidential succession, vice presidential vacancy, and presidential disability. The rules in regards to that. 26th Amendment is voting age set to 18 years old. And 27th Amendment is congressional pay. And so you notice that happened in 1992. So you see the years there, the amendments to the Constitution. You have to have certain, the states all have to ratify the amendment, and it has to be a certain number of votes for this ratification to change the Constitution. So that's a quick list. First president of the United States of America. States. I got a typo there. I'm sorry about that. United States of America is President George Washington. He was in office from 1789 to 1797, and his vice president was John Adams, who would become the next president. So George Washington, John Adams, then Jefferson. And obviously that is a very famous painting of George Washington because you probably see that on your money. And that is it for the second half of the Revolutionary War, Revolutions Lecture Part 3. I'll see you in a second. All right, class, that's it for today. Next time, we'll be looking at the French Revolution. I'll see you then.